The red tails, shattering skies, and prejudice. On a sweltering July afternoon in 1943, the skies above the Castelvetrano airfield in Sicily became the stage for a moment of profound historical significance. A German Focke-Wulf FW-190, a formidable and agile fighter, was caught in the sights of a P-40 Warhawk diving from the sun. The German pilot, his vision obscured by the glare, never saw his attacker. A sustained burst of machine gun fire ripped through his fuselage, sending his aircraft into an uncontrollable, fatal spiral toward the Sicilian countryside below. At the controls of that P-40L Warhawk was First Lieutenant Charles B. Hall, a 22-year-old from Brazil, Indiana. In that single decisive engagement, Hall had accomplished what the high command of the German Luftwaffe would have deemed an impossibility. A black pilot had just shot down one of their elite fighter aircraft. The swastika victory mark painted on the side of Hall's Warhawk that day would be the first of 112 confirmed enemy aircraft destroyed by the men whom German pilots would later, with a mixture of fear and respect, reportedly nickname the Schwarze Vogelmenschen, the Black Birdmen. This event was not merely a tactical victory, it was a direct refutation of a core tenet of Nazi ideology. The racial doctrines of the Third Reich classified black people as Untermenschen, subhuman, beings considered inherently incapable of mastering complex machinery, demonstrating strategic thought, or possessing martial courage. The infamous Nuremberg laws had explicitly forbidden marriages or relations between Germans and people of African descent. Yet high above the Mediterranean, this warped ideology was about to collide, catastrophically and repeatedly, with an unassailable reality. They were about to face 992 meticulously trained pilots from Tuskegee, Alabama, who would systematically dismantle both the Luftwaffe's aircraft and its foundational assumptions about racial superiority. What the seasoned German pilots climbing to intercept American bomber formations in 1943 could not have known was that they were ascending to meet some of the most disciplined, highly skilled, and fiercely motivated fighter pilots in the entire United States Army Air Forces. These were men who had overcome institutional obstacles their white counterparts could scarcely imagine. They had trained longer and under more intense scrutiny, their every move watched for failure. They carried into the cockpit not only the weight of their nation's duty, but the immense burden of proving the capability and courage of an entire race which had been systematically maligned and oppressed. The complex mathematics of aerial warfare would soon be inscribed across the European skies in a language of undeniable success. Over 15,000 individual combat sorties, 1,578 combat missions, 112 confirmed aerial victories, and, most tellingly, a bomber escort loss rate that was significantly lower than that of white fighter groups. These were not just numbers on a report, they were statistical facts that would force even the most fanatical Nazi ideologues to confront the utter bankruptcy of their racial theories. The arduous road to the skies, confronting American prejudice. The journey to that first, pivotal victory over Sicily began not on a foreign battlefield, but within the deeply entrenched system of American segregation. The United States military itself was one of the most significant proponents of racial inferiority. In 1925, the U.S. Army War College had published a report titled The Employment of Negro Manpower in War, which served as the official justification for discrimination. The report concluded, with no scientific basis, that the Negro is docile, tractable, light-hearted, carefree, and good-natured. He is by nature subservient and naturally believes himself inferior to the white man. He cannot control himself in the face of danger. This damning assessment, endorsed by the military establishment, claimed that black soldiers lacked the intelligence for technical roles like aviation and the moral fortitude for combat leadership. Yet, even as the American military clung to these prejudices, a vanguard of black aviators was already proving them false. During World War I, Eugene Bullard, denied the chance to fly for his own country, became a decorated pilot for the French Air Service. In 1921, Bessie Coleman, facing rejection from every American flight school, traveled to France to earn her international pilot's license, becoming a sensational barnstormer and a symbol of black aspiration. By the 1930s, institutions like the Coffee School of Aeronautics in Chicago were quietly training dozens of skilled black civilian pilots, demonstrating conclusively that the aptitude for flight recognized no racial boundaries. As the threat of another world war loomed over Europe, the pressure for change within the United States intensified. A powerful coalition of civil rights leaders, including Walter White of the NAACP and Labor leader A. Philip Randolph, began a relentless lobbying campaign. The black press, powerful newspapers like the Chicago Defender, the Pittsburgh Courier, and the Baltimore Afro-American, waged a journalistic crusade, hammering the Roosevelt administration with a piercing moral question. How could America credibly fight for freedom and democracy abroad while systematically denying those very principles to millions of its own citizens at home? This pressure yielded a first hesitant crack in the door. On April 3, 1939, Public Law 18 was passed. A crucial amendment, inserted by Senator Harry H. Schwartz, mandated that the civilian pilot training program include schools designated for the training of Negro pilots. It was a segregated, grudging concession, but it represented a critical foothold. The political calculus became undeniable in 1940 as President Franklin D. Roosevelt sought an unprecedented third term, needing the support of black voters in key northern industrial cities. Finally, on January 16, 1941, bowing to this pressure, the War Department under Secretary Henry L. Stimson announced the formation of the 99th Pursuit Squadron, an all-black flying unit. The announcement, however, was couched in the language of skepticism. This was to be a military experiment designed to test whether black men possessed the capacity for combat flight. Baptism by fire, from North Africa to a historic first kill. Leading this experiment was Captain Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., a man who understood the weight of command better than most. The son of the U.S. Army's first black general, Davis had endured 4 years of the silent treatment at West Point, where not a single white cadet would speak to him outside of official duty. Now he was tasked with commanding a squadron of men who carried not only their own ambitions, but the hopes and dreams of 13 million black Americans. In April 1943, the 99th Fighter Squadron arrived in North Africa, attached to the 33rd Fighter Group, under the command of Colonel William W. Momia. Momia made little secret of his skepticism, even hostility, toward the black pilots. He initially assigned them to low-risk patrol missions over the Mediterranean, deliberately keeping them away from intense combat zones, seemingly setting the stage for their failure. When the 99th didn't immediately achieve aerial victories in these limited roles, Momia believed he had his confirmation of their inadequacy. Their first true combat mission came on the morning of June 6, 1943, during an attack on the Italian-held island of Pantelleria. As their worn P-40 Warhawks climbed towards the target, they were jumped by German fighters. The Tuskegee pilots, however, did not break. They held their disciplined formation, protecting the bombers they were escorting. While no enemy aircraft were shot down that day, the Germans received their first lesson. These pilots possessed unshakable nerve under fire. But it was on July 2, 1943, that the experiment yielded an undeniable result. Charles B. Hall was flying his 8th mission, escorting B-25 Mitchell bombers attacking the Castelvetrano airfield. As the bombers completed their run, 2 Focke-Wulf FW-190s dove to attack them. Hall later recounted, "I saw 2 Focke-Wulfs following the bombers just after the bombs were dropped. I headed for the space between the fighters and bombers and managed to turn inside the Jerry. I fired a long burst and saw my tracers penetrate the second aircraft. He was turning to the left, but suddenly fell off and headed straight into the ground." When Hall landed back at base, The celebration was electric. For the black ground crews, who had endured months of insults and condescension from white personnel, this was a moment of profound vindication. Hall's victory was the first aerial kill by a black American pilot in U.S. military history, a tangible answer to every slight and a shattering of a monumental barrier. The crucible of Anzio and the formation of the Red Tails. Despite this achievement, the prejudice persisted. By January 1944, after 7 months in combat, Colonel Momia filed a devastating report claiming the 99th lacked aggressiveness and recommending their removal from combat. The report reached General Henry Hap Arnold, the commander of the Army Air Forces, who seriously considered terminating the Tuskegee experiment. Then came the Battle of Anzio. On January 27th and 28th, 1944, the Luftwaffe launched massive, desperate raids against the Allied forces trapped at the Anzio beachhead. On these 2 critical days, the pilots of the 99th, still flying their obsolete P-40s, were thrown into the fray against superior German FW-190s. What they accomplished would silence their critics forever. In a display of sheer skill and courage, the squadron shot down multiple enemy aircraft. Reports vary between 8 and 13 confirmed kills over the 2-day period. Captain Charles Hall himself claimed 2 more victories, making him an ace. In just 48 hours, flying inferior equipment, they had destroyed more enemy aircraft than in the previous 7 months combined. This performance forced the War Department to commission a formal study comparing the 99th to other P-40 squadrons. The conclusion was unequivocal. The black pilots were performing just as well as their white counterparts. The victory at Anzio was not just a military success. It was a bureaucratic and political triumph that saved the Tuskegee program. In May 1944, the experiment evolved into a formidable force. The 302nd Fighter Group was formed, combining the veteran 99th with the new 100th, 301st, and 302nd Fighter Squadrons. Their orders transformed them from a questioned sideshow into a legendary unit. They would join the 15th Air Force as long-range bomber escorts, flying the most dangerous missions deep into the heart of Nazi Germany. Colonel Benjamin Davis, now leading the group, gathered his pilots at Ramatelli Airfield on Italy's Adriatic coast and laid down a doctrine that would define their legacy. "We cannot afford to lose bombers. Our job is not to be aces. Our job is to bring those bombers home." This directive to prioritize protection over personal glory became the core of their combat philosophy. Around this time, the 332nd received its iconic identity. To distinguish between fighter groups, the 15th Air Force under General Nathan Twining instituted a color coding system. The 382nd was assigned the color red. Soon, their new P-51 Mustangs were adorned with vibrant crimson, entire tail sections, propeller spinners, and nosebands. The Red Tails were born. Bomber crews, initially unaware their escorts were black, quickly learned to recognize and request the Red Tail Angels, knowing that these fighters, unlike some others, would never abandon them to chase easy kills. Masters of the skies, escorting bombers and taming jets. The Red Tail's reputation was forged in fire on missions like the July 18, 1944, raid on the Luftwaffe base at Memmingen, Germany. Colonel Davis led 66 Mustangs to rendezvous with a bomber stream. The bombers were late, and Davis made a fateful decision to orbit in hostile airspace rather than abandon the mission. When the bombers finally arrived, so did the Luftwaffe, over 100 German fighters attacking from all directions. In a ferocious 20-minute battle, the 332nd fought desperately, claiming 11 to 12 enemy aircraft, but losing 15 bombers and 3 of their own pilots. Critics pounced, but a deeper analysis revealed the truth. The Red Tails had arrived late into an impossible tactical situation and had, through their fierce defense, prevented a total catastrophe. By early 1945, the Luftwaffe's conventional fighter force was decimated, but Germany unveiled a terrifying new weapon, the Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet fighter. With a speed of 540 mph, it could outrun any Allied propeller-driven plane. On March 24, 1945, the 332nd faced its ultimate test, a 1-600-mile round-trip escort mission to Berlin. Intelligence warned that a large force of Me-262s would be waiting. Over the German capital, the jets appeared. The Tuskegee Airmen, however, had studied their adversary. Lieutenant Roscoe Brown explained their tactic. "We knew the German jets were faster than we were. Instead of going directly after them, we went away from them and then turned into their blind spots." In a stunning display of skill, Brown, along with Lieutenants Earl Lane and Charles Brantley, each shot down an Me-262. The destruction of 3 of the advanced jets in a single engagement was an unparalleled feat. It represented more jet kills than most Allied fighter groups achieved in the entire war. For this mission, the 322nd Fighter Group received a Distinguished Unit Citation, a testament to their elite status. The human dimension, POWs, ground crews, and the double victory. The Tuskegee Airmen's war was not only fought in the skies. 32 of their pilots were shot down and became prisoners of war. Their experiences in German camps, like Stalag Luft III, were complex. Lieutenant Alexander Jefferson, shot down in August 1944, was shocked during his interrogation by the depth of German intelligence on the 322nd. In the camps, however, he found himself treated as an equal officer by his white American counterparts, a stark contrast to the segregation back home. The irony was profound. In a Nazi POW camp, he experienced a level of integration impossible in the United States. Behind every victorious pilot stood hundreds of unsung heroes, the black mechanics, armorers, and crew chiefs. Of the approximately 16,000 men who served as Tuskegee Airmen, fewer than 1,000 were pilots. These ground crews performed miracles of maintenance at primitive bases like Ramitelli, often with scarce resources, yet they consistently achieved aircraft availability rates that matched or exceeded those of white units. They too faced danger from enemy bombing raids, proving that courage was not confined to the cockpit. The strategic impact of the Red Tails was immense. Each B-17 flying fortress they protected represented a $238,000 investment and 10 highly trained crew members. The 382nd's exceptional record of losing only 27 bombers to enemy fighters, compared to an average of 46 for other P-51 groups in the 15th Air Force, saved countless lives and invaluable war material. Their disciplined, layered escort tactics became a model of efficiency, legacy, from wartime victory to peacetime change. The Tuskegee Airmen fought a dual war against fascism abroad and racism at home. Their victories were celebrated in the black press's Double V campaign, but were often ignored by the mainstream media. While German pilots reportedly knew and respected the Schwarze Vogelmännchen, many white Americans remained unaware that black pilots were fighting for their country. After the war, the men of the 322nd returned to a segregated nation. Their stellar record, however, had created an undeniable argument for change. In 1948, their performance was a key factor influencing President Harry S. Truman's decision to sign Executive Order 9981, mandating the desegregation of the U.S. Armed Forces. Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. went on to become the U.S. Air Force's first black general in 1954. For decades, their story remained in the shadows. Recognition was slow in coming. It was not until 2007 that the Tuskegee Airmen were collectively awarded the Congressional Gold Medal by President George W. Bush. By then, only about 300 of the original pilots were alive to receive the nation's highest civilian honor, a bittersweet moment after a 60-year wait. The legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen is etched in irrefutable statistics and profound social change. Their 112 aerial victories, the downing of 3 Me-262 jets in a single day, their unparalleled bomber protection record, and their 96 distinguished flying crosses stand as permanent monuments to their skill and valor. They proved with cold, hard facts that the color of a man's skin has no bearing on his ability to fly, to fight, and to lead. As Roscoe Brown aptly summarized, "We didn't just fight the Germans. We fought ignorance, prejudice, and hatred, and we won all three battles. They soared through barriers of bigotry, transforming mockery into enduring respect, and, in doing so, helped steer America toward a more perfect union." The invisible wall, the post-war struggle for recognition. The victory parades that swept through American cities in 1945 largely bypassed the Tuskegee Airmen. While white units were celebrated in a blaze of publicity, the men of the 322nd returned to a nation that, for the most part, remained willfully ignorant of their existence and indifferent to their accomplishments. They exchanged their flight jackets for civilian clothes and faced the same Jim Crow laws they had ostensibly fought against. The Double V campaign had secured victory abroad, but the victory at home remained elusive. The transition to civilian life was fraught with the same prejudices they had overcome in the military. Many highly skilled pilots and mechanics found their wartime experience dismissed or ignored. Lee Archer, who had achieved 4 confirmed aerial victories and was arguably an ace, though one victory was later classified as ground credit, returned to a country where his credentials were met with skepticism. He later recounted the pervasive attitude, "Nobody believed me anyway. A black fighter pilot must be lying." He built a successful corporate career, but like many of his comrades, he largely buried his war stories, knowing they fell on deaf or disbelieving ears. Other aces like Edward Toppins and Joseph Ellsbury, who had also claimed 4 victories each, faded from public view, their heroism a quiet memory in a nation not ready to listen. The official records of the Tuskegee Airmen, while impeccable, were not widely publicized by the War Department. Their story became a proud but contained narrative within black communities, celebrated in black newspapers and veterans' halls, but absent from mainstream history books and the popular consciousness of post-war America. The military itself, despite the overwhelming evidence provided by the Tuskegee experiment, was reluctant to change. The Army Air Forces, transitioning into the independent United States Air Force in 1947, initially planned to maintain segregated units. It was the sheer weight of the airmen's performance, coupled with the changing political landscape of the emerging Cold War, that made segregation militarily indefensible. How could America present itself as the leader of the free world against the Soviet Union while practicing racial discrimination within its own armed forces? The pivotal moment came on July 26, 1948, when President Harry S. Truman signed Executive Order 9981, declaring it to be the policy of the President that there shall be equality of treatment and opportunity for all persons in the armed services without regard to race, color, religion, or national origin. This was a direct result of the political pressure generated by the successes of units like the Tuskegee Airmen. They had provided the living, breathing, and victorious proof that integration worked and strengthened the military. Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., now a colonel, played a crucial role in the implementation of this new policy, serving on the advisory committee that oversaw the integration of the armed forces. His leadership, forged in the crucible of West Point's silent treatment and the skies over Europe, was instrumental in guiding the Air Force through this transformative period. The long road to the Congressional Gold Medal. For decades, the Tuskegee Airmen existed as a half-remembered legend. The 1950s and 1960s saw the civil rights movement fight battles on buses, at lunch counters, and in schools, battles for which the airmen had paved the way. Their story was a source of inspiration within the movement, a demonstration that black excellence could shatter the most entrenched barriers. The first significant wave of national recognition began in the 1970s with the rise of social history and a growing interest in the Black American experience. Books, articles, and documentaries started to piece their story back together. Organizations of Tuskegee Airmen, formed by the veterans themselves, worked tirelessly to ensure their history would not be lost. They gave lectures, visited schools, and lobbied for their place in the historical record. The 1995 HBO film, The Tuskegee Airmen, introduced their story to a mass audience for the first time. While a dramatization, it captured the essence of their struggle and their triumph, bringing the names of Benjamin Davis, Charles Hall, and Lee Archer into living rooms across the nation. This renewed interest fueled a grassroots campaign for formal, national recognition. The culmination of this decades-long effort came in 2007. On March 29th of that year, President George W. Bush, in a ceremony held in the Capitol Rotunda, presented the Congressional Gold Medal, the nation's highest civilian award, to the Tuskegee Airmen. The scene was profoundly moving and bittersweet. Of the roughly 16,000 men who had served as pilots, navigators, bombardiers, instructors, mechanics, and support staff, only about 300 were still alive to witness this long overdue moment. Many of the elderly veterans, some in wheelchairs, dressed in their distinctive red-tailed blazers, received a standing ovation from the nation's most powerful leaders. President Bush acknowledged the painful delay, stating, "I would like to offer a gesture to help atone for all the unreturned salutes and unforgivable indignities. All of you have earned a unique place in American history, and you will always have the undying gratitude of the American people." The medal itself was a tangible symbol, but the true victory was in the recognition. It was the official end of their second war, the war for historical memory and respect. The enduring legacy, inspiring generations and shaping modern warfare. The legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen extends far beyond medals and movies. It is woven into the fabric of the modern United States military and serves as a perpetual inspiration for future generations. Integration of the military. Their success was the single most important factor in convincing President Truman and the Pentagon to desegregate the armed forces. They proved that an integrated military was not just a moral imperative, but a tactical one. This directly led to the racially integrated fighting force that exists today, a force where capability, not color, is the sole criterion for service and leadership. The Civil Rights Movement. The airmen were pioneers of the Civil Rights Movement. Their disciplined, professional, and undeniable success used the system itself to defeat the system's prejudices. They provided a powerful counterargument to segregationists and gave hope and pride to Black Americans demanding their full rights as citizens. They demonstrated that separate but equal was not only immoral, but also a lie that cost the nation talent and valor. The U.S. space program. The connection between the Tuskegee Airmen and NASA is a direct line of brilliance. Captain Charles F. Bolden, Jr., a former Marine Corps aviator and astronaut who became the first African-American administrator of NASA, consistently cited the Tuskegee Airmen as his inspiration. Similarly, Colonel Guion Guy Bluford, the first African-American in space, stood on the shoulders of the men who broke the color barrier in the sky. The airmen proved that the sky was not the limit for Black ambition, it was just the beginning. A symbol of excellence and perseverance. Today, the story of the Red Tails is taught in schools as a quintessential American story of overcoming adversity. Their legacy is not just one of military victory, but of character. The discipline to stay with the bombers, the courage to face down both enemy fighters and institutional bigotry, and the perseverance to continue the fight for recognition long after the guns fell silent. The final fitting chapter in this story of transformation from mockery to respect is best encapsulated in the words of the men themselves. Roscoe Brown, the jet killer of Berlin, lived a long life of service as an educator and administrator. He often reflected, "We rose from the ashes of discrimination to the pinnacle of aviation." The Tuskegee Airmen did not just win battles, they changed the very calculus of human potential. They forced a nation to look upward and see, in the crimson tails of their Mustangs, not the color of their skin, but the content of their character and the measure of their immense capability. They were, and remain, American heroes in the truest sense, their final and greatest victory being a more just and unified nation.